Hey, listeners, I am so excited to be back in my office. And this is not, as you can tell, a Zoom video call. This is an in person. And I have my friend Wendy Rickard here with me. Wendy and I are part of a little writers group, and we meet every other week. And Wendy has an amazing story. And I just knew that you would enjoy and be inspired and encouraged by hearing what God's done in her life and her family's life. So, hello, Wendy.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting
Well,
me.
I'm so glad that you're here. So, Wendy, can you just give us just a little bit of background about where you are right now in your life?
Yes, I'm married to my husband, and we are celebrating 25 years of
Oh,
marriage very soon. Hey, thank
congratulations.
you. And we have an older daughter. Her name is Abby, and she lives in Iowa. She is a therapist for a neurology clinic. And our son is in college right now, doing his second year, and he's going into business entrepreneurship and financial planning.
And he's at Liberty, right?
Yep, he's at Liberty
Oh,
University.
that's
Really
awesome.
enjoying it. Yes. And I stay at home, take care of the household, but I'm also writing a book. So excited about that, sharing our story and getting that out to give hope to others, Lord willing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the reason that I wanted to have you on the podcast because Wendy has, when Wendy shared her story, I was just blown away by how you just have just this lightness and this
Mm,
you just radiate joy. And having been through all the things that you've been through, that is not an easy thing.
mm.
And so I appreciate that. And so I want, because this story involved was it's all of Wendy's family, but it mostly starts with what happened to her husband. How many years ago has it been?
18 years
18 years
ago.
ago.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
But before we get to that, we're going to go back to you and your husband Darren's childhood. So can you just tell us a little bit about your growing up stories?
Sure. And that joy only comes from the Lord,
Yeah, that's
not
why
my
I
own
know.
manufacturing
Yeah.
it. Yeah, Darren was actually raised in a suburb of Chicago, and he's the middle of two sisters, typical Midwestern family. He had his first brain injury when he was 7, and he struggled to read and to write. And so
Now,
he
how
had
did
to
that happen? His first
he
one?
fell down a flight of stairs. I shouldn't say fell. He actually jumped down a
Oh,
flight of stairs. He was playing with a neighbor, and he hit the metal beam that's in the soffit. He went right through it. So he jumped pretty hard into that and was screaming unconscious for several hours in the hospital.
oh,
So
wow.
it was pretty severe, but he gained much back, but he doesn't have any memory of his childhood before age 7.
Wow.
Yes.
Gosh.
Yeah. So he struggled in that, but he became a Christian when he was in high school. His sports was his life. He just excelled at many sports and went to FCA, the Fellowship of Christian
Hmm.
Athletes, and became a Christian then, but still struggled a little bit with not being good enough. That was a little bit in his heart
Yeah.
to begin with. But his strong family that really they were very supportive of each other. And he did do property management when he was young because he has been in property management all his life.
Hmm.
And he started his own little business at age 10. So he's
Oh,
just a
wow.
go-getter and an achiever,
Yeah.
very much of an achiever. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So then your childhood.
Yes, my childhood, I was born and raised in the North Detroit area in Michigan, and Midwestern suburb. I enjoyed being there, was heavily involved with activities and sports and such, and played tennis in high school and college. But my mom, I was 8 years old when my mom became a Christian.
Okay.
And so she would share with me a little bit, but along the way, I think I shared that I accepted Christ. I'm not positive, but we all started going to churches, various different churches along the way. And so it wasn't until later on, outside of college, after I'd kind of done my own thing, that I became a Christian around the age of 23.
Okay. So
Yeah.
did his family, were they in church or?
Yes, yes, they
Okay.
were. I think they were Methodist and stayed in the church all the way along.
Okay. Well, good.
Yeah.
So let's go to where you and Darren meet.
Okay. We actually, Darren was 37 at the time. He had never been married before.
Wow, I
Uh-huh.
didn't know that.
And I was 30. And after college, I went to a church startup. I just felt like I needed some sort of um, faith, really, in the
Mhm,
struggles that I'd gone through. And so I went to a startup called Kensington Community Church in Troy, Michigan. And mentors of mine really gave me solid truth and really walked alongside me for several years. And their names were Ann and Dave
mhm,
and Kathy. Those three. Ann is married to Dave, and
mhm,
Dave was one of the pastors at Kensington.
mhm.
And Kathy was another mentor friend of mine. And one day she had prayed, we were at breakfast together, and she prayed, I really feel like God could bring a man into your life. And a couple hours later, Anne called and said, I met a man at this retreat lodge and I want you to meet him. And
Wow.
so that's how the story started. And first I was nervous to meet this, what she called mountain man,
Oh.
because he lived in Colorado previous to coming to the other side of the state of Michigan.
Uh-huh.
And so eventually, over the course of several months, Ann and Dave set us up on a blind date. And so on that date, I was kind of lit a fire under him because he was very calm and he calmed me down. And we just had a wonderful time together. And so it ended up being within a year or so, Ann and Dave ended up marrying us, but
Wow.
they had set us up in a really good supportive way with premarital counseling and just walked alongside us in beautiful ways. So it was a really neat
I
experience.
think that is so important. And when I was, I've been married 39 years.
Oh, that's
When
wonderful.
when we went to go to our pastor, and I thought it was going to be like a premarital thing. And of course, I was only 19 years old. I was very young. I had turned 20. I got married 2 weeks after I turned 20. So I was very young. But the pastor, when I went in, the first thing he said was, how many bridesmaids are you going to have? And I was like, oh, okay, well, this is how this is going. So that was basically our premarital counseling. So I am a big advocate of premarital counseling because I think it prepares you for things that
Mhm.
you would not have expected
Yes,
otherwise.
very much so.
So, and I
Mhm.
feel like that probably was a good foundation for all that you and Darren have had to go through in your
It
marriage.
absolutely was. In fact, our premarital counselor told us that he said, you're 30, you're 37, you're both mature in your personalities, but if you are younger and not as mature, this may not work. But because you are, I feel like I can give you the go ahead in
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So we knew already that because of our personalities, I'm more like the bull in the china shop. Darren is the calm, stable bulwark.
Yeah. Like me and my husband. Yeah.
Yeah, that it would work, that it would work well.
Yeah.
And yet we never had any clue what would happen in our futures and how much hardship that would happen.
So let's go to that. So you got married and you had two, well, tell us about that, your journey
Yes.
to become parents.
Yes, we moved to Colorado shortly after we were married for a property management job in Aspen, and Darren had already lived there, so he already knew the community. So it was almost like we were moving back into his community and
Mhm.
me for the first time, which was amazing being in the mountains and just enjoying really recreation. We would bike together and hike and just all of the beauty that was there. We were
I'm
just soaking
sure.
it up together.
Yeah.
And then we had a miscarriage, and then we had Abby. And Abby's just a spunky girl. And then another miscarriage, and then TJ.
Mm.
And so there was hardship. Darren and I we knew that we grieved differently. And there had been hardship even before we were married, but this was another trial with those miscarriages that were hard.
Hmm.
But the biggest trial that came was when Abby was 5 and TJ was 3. Darren was doing a typical job, going to a house. He was on a roof line, but within like a retaining wall, and down below was a cement utility area. And somehow he lost balance, and he ended up falling headfirst into that utility area.
Mm.
And so he lost his Bluetooth. He didn't know, he doesn't remember any of the accident, but he ended up hitting an AC compressor first with his shoulder, broke his shoulder, broke his collarbone, and then actually ended up crumpling on his head.
Oh,
And
but it
so
probably broke some of that fall.
it did. It
Yeah.
did. And we were so grateful. The scene after that was complete chaos, so much stress involved in a hematoma pooling in his neck, and very specific ways that we saw God working to spare him,
Mm.
because he could have been dead or
Yeah.
paralyzed.
And how far did he fall?
He fell 20 feet.
Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's amazing that he survived that.
Yes, and we hear now of people falling off of step ladders,
I
and they have a
know.
brain bleed and they pass away. So
Right.
we knew that there was a purpose in this, and but right away the struggle started
Mm.
of traumatic brain injury, and what does that mean? And I had a friend who I didn't know super well, but she knew what had happened, and she sat me down over lunch and she said, "You have to start over in your marriage." And I
Mm.
said, "I don't understand that. What do you mean by starting over?" And she said, "What Darren has now in a moderate traumatic brain injury, we have to start dating again, really start your process of your relationship over again." And I didn't understand that until a week or 2 weeks later, when I saw Darren's more childlike attitude, and the way he related or didn't relate. He was very quiet, but then he got angry from certain things. And what we learned later was his brain, when you accelerate, decelerate, it's a little descriptive, that his brain hit in the soft part of the brain, of course, is housed in the skull. And so his brain hit one side and then it hit the other side. So he almost had two bruises on his brain.
Yeah.
And there are many, many God stories of ways that he was spared, but the bottom line was he was a different person, and he became more of a stranger in our home than someone we really understood.
Mm.
And the kids struggled too. They were shocked by when he came home, and arm in a sling, and his head was bandaged, and just a big struggle to understand, like, where did my daddy go, as a 5 and a 3-year-old.
So when he was at the like how long was he in the
He
hospital?
was only in for 2 days.
Oh, wow. But
They trained me for his clavicle. They didn't say anything about brain injury,
they
so
didn't say anything?
I had no information about brain injury. So I came home not understanding specific things and actions that he would do. And so it made me feel insecure and unsafe, because I'm not sure what he's going to do next. Well, Darren, what are you doing? There's certain areas that I just expected our lives to be normal, and they
Right.
weren't.
Right.
So there was irritability. He had more like a kind of a awareness that he had to go to doctor's appointments, but he didn't know what the timing was. So he'd be nervous hours before he would need to go. So try to settle him down in that. And lots of just ways that his brain wasn't working well, because of course he landed hard.
Yeah.
And so it started us on a journey of learning about brain injury, and really the hardship where so many have gone through, but also the hopefulness of the brain can change too, because the brain is plastic and it can grow the dendrites and
Mm,
all the medical terms that I don't understand.
yeah.
But we noticed that he had lost some things, but he could still do some functional things like what he does in his property management job. But over several weeks, he couldn't drive, he couldn't go back to work. He was just struggling and trying to regain cognition and regain physical prowess. And it was a big struggle. And he started to realize, okay, I'm not the man that I was.
Mm,
I can't go through 100 details a day for property management. I can't go back to my job and do what I was meant to do. And it magnified that thought in his back of his mind of I'm not good enough
mm,
from his childhood. And it was almost like brain injury just put a spotlight on that of okay, I'm not good enough. So anger came out as well.
mm,
And emotions, some emotions, few emotions here and there, but for the most part, everything was dampened other than the anger.
mm.
And that anger kind of came full force. And so we had good days and hard days as he recovered. He went to vision therapy. We took him to all the different therapies that we needed to know about and do. The psych doctors, we went to them. There was a lot of really awesome help that we did receive, which was a crucial part
Mm.
of his healing. But the emotional part was probably the hardest that he came up against and the hardest for our family.
So did he lose any of his memory this time?
He lost all memory of the actual incident and about an hour or so of afterwards. They call it accident-related amnesia, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
brain trauma-related amnesia.
Yeah.
And so he lost that, but he didn't lose everything entirely, which I thank
Oh,
God because
yeah.
he could have been in a really bad state.
Yeah. So I guess he wasn't able to really go back to his job, right?
He tried to go back part-time after several months, but the job just was too demanding for his brain. And so if you could envision um, a a person waking up and you have, X amount of energy for the day,
Yeah.
and when a brain injury occurs, that amount is much smaller. So anything that could be taxing to a person that has a brain injury, that really it's cut down low, and then once they hit that threshold, they're done. It's almost like a little computer or a computer, the laptop's going to sleep. I'm done. And he just had to go lay down in a quiet room and sleep a whole
Wow.
bunch. So he tried and he tried for several months part-time. And then one day he realized, and this is his words saying that he wanted to get back to the man that he was. And he kept saying, God, I want to be that man. I can't do more to try to get back to that. And he very much sensed that God was saying, I don't want you to be that man anymore,
Mm.
that you're a new creation and I'm doing something in you and through you to work in your heart.
Wow.
And it really helped him. And that was that week. He went to his boss and he said, I recognize that I should not be doing this anymore. And so what ended up happening was we joke about that he got hit on the head because there's a little vision that we had years prior to that to start a family camp ministry or some sort of ministry, and we didn't know what that would look like.
Mm-hmm.
But we took about a year to discern that. I worked a part-time business and God provided financially in that. And so when we discerned that it was a family camp ministry, we started doing some different adventures with other families, knowing the heartache that we went through. We wanted to
Mm-hmm.
help others. And so we did this, but what happened was we were serving in that capacity, but we ourselves weren't working on our marriage.
Mm.
We were busy and we kept moving forward. I had emotions that were coming out from his emotions. He had emotions that were coming out from my emotions. And it became almost like a perfect storm of brain injury related dysfunction in a marriage, and also affecting our kids too, because they developed a different in a different way. They had to grow up really quickly.
Mm,
You know, dad's sleeping. You can't do this. And and a 5 and a 3-year-old,
yeah,
they want to play, they want to do things. So
right.
they really moved into more of a maturity sooner than a child ever would be expected to. And
I know you had mentioned too that even like in making decisions, like for the family and things like that,
mhm.
that those even became more difficult because you felt a lot of that you had to carry yourself. Is that right?
Yes, yes. When he fell, it was almost like that day changed our lives forever, because it felt like I lost that covering of my husband. We lost physical intimacy, that was
Mm,
gone,
mm,
lost emotional intimacy, lost even spiritual intimacy.
mm,
It was almost like we had to go on a date again and again, and it was like the same topics would come up and the same we just never, it just didn't feel like we were able to learn and grow together. And so it made me feel unsafe. It made him feel unworthy
mm.
once he was cognitively recognizing that. And then more anger came, and then more bitterness piled on for me.
Yeah.
And so it started snowballing into a dynamic where I just tried to control everything I could.
Mm,
Just get the kids. We were homeschooling at the time. Just get the kids to a little co-op, help this, do our ministry. It really felt like we were maybe hiding in the busyness of life and not
mm-hmm.
really getting to the core of what was happening.
Mm,
And brain injuries are considered the invisible injury, because if you walk down the street and somebody has a broken arm and you say, "Oh, what happened? How did this happen?" Nobody can see the bruise on the brain.
mm-hmm.
He had physical, obviously, a huge gash in his head when he fell and all that. But once that healed, it was almost like we were supposed to be acting normal in that.
Mm-hmm. Everything should just go back to the way it was.
Yes, but behind the scenes, nothing was the way it was. So, in that control of me trying to control things and his saying, "Oh, well, I've got this," but cognitively he didn't have it, it just became more of a spiral for us. The busyness, the kids, we just, kind of kept going, and we had amazing community. We had beautiful friends who had stepped in to help and were praying for us. But even then, we didn't know really how to ask for help.
Mm,
We were struggling internally so much that it was like, I don't even know how to ask.
yeah.
And also struggling too is like, why, God? Like, why did we
Right.
have to go through
Why
this?
did this happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And why do our kids have to suffer?
Yeah.
Why did Darren regress? Like, what does that look like? So it was almost like the bouncing back and forth between being so grateful that God spared him
Mm,
and so thankful that we have each other, and then feeling so almost ugly, really almost sad and isolated that we were in this position.
mm,
So it was a deeper, harder time for us.
yeah.
Kind of a loneliness that could set in. And at the same time, we both knew the Lord. We both felt that God had taken us through more in our lives and in our marriage. We had the faith to believe that He was good,
Mm-hmm.
and we had the faith to understand, God, you can change and work things out. But in it, it felt just this deep heartache that just wouldn't go away, like a burden that's just never been lifted.
Yeah. Like you
And
wake up every day and it's still there.
yes, yeah. And that is what I think made me sad. Like,
Yeah.
God, I pleaded with him to spare him, to help him get back to the person that he wanted to be also.
Yeah.
And then over time started seeing that God was doing a work in our marriage and our lives that we would have never expected.
Mm,
But even before all that, before we could see that, there was a deep-rooted unforgiveness in my heart, a bitter root that I had specifically towards God that started growing, and then towards Darren. And it would come out in subtle quips, like subtle reactions to Darren if he missed something, or I became impatient with him and then he became angry. There were just these little kind of nuances between us that we weren't meeting eye to eye in our even in our own paths, kind of walking parallel with each other, but not walking together in that. And I remember specifically one night he was frustrated about something, and so I got frustrated as well. And I went upstairs and I was going to write him a letter because I love to write. And in that letter, as I was writing, I thought, he's a child of you, God. I'm a sinner too. Like, why am I condemning my own husband for something that has happened to him and he's reacting to his environment? Like, he needs your love, he needs my love. And I asked right then, God, this is about me and my anger. Would you help me to forgive him? And I just had this flood of grace pour over me, just knowing that God knew way back when. He already knew that Darren was going to fall the 20 feet. He already knew our circumstances. He already knew that I was going to be angry. He already knew that Darren, one of the key emotions that doesn't go away is anger in with a brain injured person.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he knew all that. And so I started realizing, God, help me to be the person that you want me to be for Darren, for my husband. And over those years, and all of the different discussions, all the different quips back and forth and all of that, he just slowly started chipping it away at I think the pride I had, and the unworthiness that Darren felt, and started shifting that to help us learn and grow, that he's all we need, and to lean on him more. And it started shifting in a way that by the time we moved to Greenville in 2015, we were really focused on wanting to work on our marriage and wanting to connect with others and want to learn and grow. And God started teaching us so much through our church and through Reengage ministry. I know many might be know about Reengage, but it's a ministry for couples that, whether they've been married for even 50 years or even 2 years, if they want to start learning more about marriage communication and all sorts of wonderful biblical truths in that, and really build their marriage up more. Or if they're to the place where they want a divorce, Reengage is a beautiful beautiful curriculum and gift to be a part of that. So we started growing in that, but it wasn't without the kind of taking maybe 3 steps forward and the 2 steps backward, or sometimes feeling it's 10 steps backward if we had some miscommunication, which is really the core of what we struggle with.
So how many years had you been married when the accident happened?
We had been married 8 years when the accident happened.
Okay. So then you moved here 7 years later. So what brought you to Greenville?
God opened up the door for many different, I think, opportunities for us, for our kids specifically. We something happened where our co-op started to kind of shut down, and we started just sensing that God wanted us to maybe move churches or maybe move communities. We just didn't know where and what that would look like. And he opened up the door where we were looking at a university model school, because with homeschool children, we wanted them to have an opportunity to still take some classes, even through high school, and then be home to be able to study through those classes, take dual enrollment, all of that. And so God opened up the door for Greenville, South Carolina. We were just doing an internet search, and up came Greenville. And I said, Darren, where's Greenville, South Carolina?
Because you were, to remind the listeners, you were in Colorado.
We
Yeah,
were, we
a
were
long way
a
away.
long way away. Yep. And so we started looking at this sweet school that Abby ended up going to. And then we thought, where would TJ go? Where does he need to fit in? And we found a very specialized school for him. And so God just started opening up the doors in ways that we never even would have even imagined that
Mm,
he would have done. And one of two answers to prayer. The first one, a year before we moved, my dad had open heart surgery, and he lives in Aiken. They both,
mm,
my dad and mom live in Aiken. And on the way back to Colorado in our tiny little valley, which takes, two flights and then drive an hour and a half and this and that, the whole day to travel,
yeah.
I had just prayed, God, I don't know how I could be closer to them. Like, would you make a way that I could get
Wow.
here more often? Never dreaming that within a year of that prayer, we were living in Greenville, South
And
Carolina.
how long does it take to get to Aiken? Not that long.
Not that long, like 2 hours, 20 minutes or so.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the other answer to prayer of what God did, Abby was very concerned because she had been born and raised in the Aspen
Oh,
area.
yeah.
And she said, my friends are here. I don't think we should move. And she's has a relationship with the Lord herself. And so she's crying out to God saying, I don't want to move. I don't want to move.
Yeah.
And we had kind of put out this idea of like in 2 months, if our house sells, we put it on the market. And if it sells before school starts, then we feel like that's the right time to go,
Mm-hmm.
and let's do that. And the kids were not on board with us.
Mm.
They were not engaged with that. And so Abby, it was July 31st. She's up in her room and she's saying, God, I don't want to move. I don't want to move. You're going to have to show me that we're going to move because we don't have an offer on our house yet. And our date was August 1st of the deadline of we're going to move by then if it sells. And we got the offer within 2 hours of her praying
Oh,
that.
wow.
She walked into the room. She heard us talking with the realtor, knowing that it was a good offer, and that was kind of our key to go. That was our final kind of confirmation to go.
Mm-hmm.
And she had said, "Mom, I have a confession." I was praying up in my room, and God has answered that. And at that point, she was on board and really, transitioned here. Somewhat hard to transition
Oh,
into a new
sure.
community at their ages, but they did really, really well coming here.
So what did your husband do and you like for your work when you
Mm-hmm.
moved here?
Mm-hmm. I still had that part-time health coaching business, and so I could bring that anywhere. So I was
Oh,
doing
good.
that, and Darren ended up working at our golf course. And
Okay.
so he started doing that. And after a couple of years, he realized that that's not what he wanted to do, of course.
Mm.
And he interviewed, we were going to North Hills Church
Yeah.
and still do.
Mm-hmm.
And he interviewed for the facilities manager job there and he got it. So
Okay.
he's been there for a good amount of time, over 5 years, possibly six now. It'll be in October. And so I'm very, very grateful for the fact that he'd never lost any of that property
Yeah.
management, but God also healed him enough to be able to do that job at just the right time
Mm.
for him to start working there.
So when uh, from what I understand from what you've said before, it was like he regressed almost in age in his brain.
Yes.
Excuse me, from when this happened and how he has grown like almost equivalent, with the age in the last 18 years through all of this happening. So how have you seen him change since when the accident first happened as to how he is now?
Oh, it's been amazing. It's really been amazing. And like I said, when the accident first happened, he was the irritability, the confusion, didn't really know what was happening at the timing. He couldn't really assimilate that. And then he started growing with maybe an emotion here or there that he had not experienced since his accident.
Mm,
So those emotions started coming out, and I would turn to him and say, you just experienced an emotion that you hadn't experienced all this
wow.
time. So it's been really neat to see him heal and to know that God's done the work in his heart after all these years, that our neuropsych doctor said there will be emotions that could come out and they may surprise you. He said, be prepared to be bewildered.
Mm,
And it's true. There are emotions that have come out to the point where now I would say that his mind is moving and has continued the last couple of years to move from black and white to abstract.
mm,
And he's gone deeper into what his thought process is. And if you met him today, you would barely know that he suffered and fell 20 feet.
wow.
It's really been a beautiful gift. Now, internally, we know with our family dynamics, and sometimes we have hiccups. We haven't arrived in our perfect
Yeah,
communication.
of course.
But it's gotten so much um, easier to talk and communicate with each other and learn and grow from each other, and realize that being patient in the waiting of healing, that God's not finished with him yet,
Mm,
and he has a purpose on this earth
yeah.
that's very clear, of how much he has healed and how he can stand before you or somebody else to say, this is what I was like, and now look at what God has done to heal me.
Mm,
And it's been very sweet. The covering that I talked about that I had lost,
yeah.
it's now coming back. I'm starting to sense that with the Lord helping me to trust him and depend on him entirely, and then I can then trust Darren
Mm,
for our marriage and trust his intuition and his insight. It's been an amazing gift to have that happen. He's restored our physical intimacy and he's restored our emotional intimacy.
mm.
And he's definitely restoring our spiritual intimacy with Darren being the leader in our home again. And I have to be very careful because I can usurp.
Yeah, I know. I know what that's
I
like.
can usurp Darren really quickly.
Yeah,
No, this is why, and
yeah.
do my explaining and all that. And in actuality, God has taught me over the years to discern internally and to wait for
Mm,
specific outcomes and to give it to God in prayer first,
hmm.
and to not lean on my husband for things that only God intended for me to lean on him
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
So
Which is
um,
something we all need to learn.
yeah, it's a gift, and we're never going to be perfect.
Mm-mm, no, we definitely are not. So I want to talk a little bit about your kids. How do
Mhm.
you think this has impacted their life?
Mm. At first, I think when Darren fell, when they lost their dad, it was heartbreaking
Mm,
because it was such a stark change. They had not seen him after the accident. They had not seen him in the hospital. It was so quick and um, so many emotions and so much intensity
mm,
that when they first saw him, they didn't know what to do as young ones. And so I think some of the hardship that they went through was more in their teen years as they adjusted and they started understanding brain injury more, and they started recognizing, okay, I can love my dad, but he just said something that was not what would ever be helpful to me,
yeah,
maybe a hurtful comment or just not treating them because he didn't have the kind of cognitive ability to do it at that
yeah.
point, the emotional stamina really to do that. And we went through some pretty hard times with them a couple years ago. Darren went through a hard season, recognizing that some of the hardship was from what he would call was exasperating his children.
Mm, yeah, the
Um,
verse in the Bible.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. And he recognized that and he asked God for forgiveness. And then he went to each of them and
Mm,
asked for their forgiveness.
wow.
It was just beautiful that they forgave him, and they have been building that relationship since then. And I think the beauty that has come out of the heartache, realizing that we personally never wanted it to happen,
Yeah.
We never wanted them to go through some of the pain and the heartache that they went through. We wanted them to have, quote, a normal,
happy
happy
childhood. Yeah.
childhood. That even in their hardship, God has used that to strengthen them. And now we can look and say, God, your story, you're writing your story on their hearts individually from our story, but it is intertwined with our story, and it's all intertwined in your bigger story of Christ coming to die and him sacrificing for our sins, and that anything that we do, God has covered already. So they've seen themselves, grace extended to them, and then they've also seen how they, through Christ, can extend grace to each other and to us as well.
Yeah.
So it's been very healing overall as a family. They've also seen our marriage grow from being angry at each other and having the expectations of a happy marriage, of a picture perfect marriage, which is just not reality.
No, there's no such thing.
No. And so they've seen us be not focused on contract, like when it gets bad in our marriage, that we're out, we're done.
Yeah.
They've seen that we made a commitment before God and promised God that we would, till death do us part, be together. And I know there's specific circumstances. I'm not talking in general about anybody else.
Yeah.
But for us, knowing that we made that commitment, they now see over the longer haul that God can still work in messy individuals and a messy relationship.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I feel like when our kids go through difficult times, it makes them more compassionate. They have more empathy because, if a kid's lived a picture perfect life, they're not going to have any sympathy for somebody else.
Right.
And I also think that you said that they started to understand more about brain injury. And I think not just for brain injuries, but anything in our lives, when there's a difficult relationship, and if we will dig a little bit to see, what is that person going through? How come how come they're so mean all the time, or, they're so impatient, or whatever the case may be. But if we dig a little bit, sometimes we can find out, wow, this is why they act this way, because they had a hardship that they had to go through. And maybe they shouldn't be acting this way, and God still got to work on them. But as Christians and as people who hopefully, like or love these people in our lives, then we need to try to understand them as well. And that is not easy, especially when it comes to family, because I think family can hurt each other more than anybody else, because you're supposed to be close. You're supposed to have, a good relationship and all of that. But I feel like when it does happen in a family, I think those are some of the hardest things to let go of, and to, you know, forgiveness. Just like you said, when your husband went and asked your kids to forgive him, that, I'm sure, just tore down a wall that had been building up over all those years. And sometimes we're too proud to admit, oh, well, it's not really my fault. But if we can recognize our part in all of this, and if we need to apologize, go and apologize, as hard as that is, or if we need to accept an apology, God blesses that.
Yes.
And we will see the fruit of that if we honor him. This morning I'm way behind on the Bible recap. I think I'm on day 79, so that tells you how far behind it. But it was in Deuteronomy, and it was I think it was 28 and 29, chapters 28 and 29. And it was like, here are the blessings that I will give you if you are obedient.
Yes.
and there's 14 verses. And then it says these are the curses if you were disobedient. And there were 54 verses. And I was like, God, wow,
Yeah.
you're this good God. Why would you say these are 14 good,
Mhm.
blessings, and these are the curses? And then when I read the Bible recap, the book that goes with it, it said God knew what they were going to do.
Yeah.
He knew that they would turn from him, that they would be disobedient. And he wanted to show them specifically he loved them enough to show them this is what's going to happen if you don't obey me. And it's, not that he wanted to, it's just there are consequences to our actions. And so as I think about that with your story and think about the blessings and the consequences, and I think so many families today are not living in the blessing.
Mm.
They're living in the consequences because they will not allow forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really, forgiveness to me feels like a trap. It feels like its own prison cell when we don't forgive. And again, that was probably the hardest part in our
Mm,
relationship, to let go of what I thought should
right.
happen
Yeah.
and how I should be treated and all of these things. And God uses it all, though.
Yeah.
And that's what's so beautiful. And you said he knows that picture of him understanding that everything that we go through, every single thing that we go through is not wasted.
Right.
So the brother and sister that are at odds with each other because something was said, to dig deep into that, even as a parent, to understand that your children might be um, uh, frustrated with each other or something, but to be able to dig down into that root cause of,
Mm-hmm.
there's something possibly that they can learn from and grow from, because God doesn't waste any of that
Right.
either.
Yeah.
And even too with Abby, knowing that her dad had a brain injury, and her now working with children and adults who have brain trauma
Mm,
or a genetic disorder, she has compassion
yeah.
that she would have never had if she had
That's
not gone through that. So even what we go through can build compassion, or
mm-hmm.
can make us kind of put people at arm's length,
Right.
and I'm not going to let anybody in, because I myself am protecting myself from
Right.
hurt. And I'm the first one to say I did that a lot. I build
Mm.
walls with Darren, and those walls did not serve me.
No, no, they don't. You
Yes.
think they are. You
Mhm.
really think they are. And you think that because I've had instances in my life where, unforgiveness. And when you said bitter root, that is exactly what it is. And it's a
Mhm.
root that is, man, you've had those weeds that, you're pulling with both hands and
That's
both
right.
feet and you can't get it out. I mean, that's what a bitter root is, and it's hard and it's painful. But once we release that,
Mhm.
it's like God can allow the goodness to flow through, just
That's
like
right.
you're seeing the fruit in your marriage, you're seeing that
Yes,
fruit in your children now,
that's right.
because I'm sure that I don't know this just came to me, but I do know statistically, like if a if parents have lost a child, that statistically the divorce rate is just through the roof
Mhm.
because that is such a hard thing to overcome. Well, I feel like if there's a traumatic brain injury or any other sort of injury that changes another spouse to a point that it really challenges their marriage, I feel like those rates are probably a lot higher too, because
Mhm.
it's easier, or it seems easier to say, I'm tired of dealing with this.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like it was.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to give up and, I'll start with somebody new.
That's right. Like, I'm done. I don't want this. I
Right.
didn't sign up for
Right.
this.
I didn't,
I'm out.
I didn't know this was going to happen. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I realized too, when I lost Darren as my protector and my provider, which was
Hmm.
originally set up in our first 8 years that
Yeah.
way, I turned empty, of course.
Mm.
But then I saw God filling that hole, in my heart, and having God be that protector and provider.
Mm,
And then in relation to that too, uh, the way God has designed marriage, the way he designed marriage way back from the beginning, of being able to connect and relate to each other on an intimate level, and walk together, that by me pushing away
mm,
didn't allow Darren to heal as much as
mm.
he could have.
Yeah.
And I recognize that now, but in the moment, it's almost like, I'm going to protect myself.
Yeah.
I'm self-sufficient. I know what the plan is,
Yeah.
God, and we're going to go this way.
Yeah.
And in that humbling, it made me recognize, and it made Darren recognize a different path, but same scenario in our marriage, what it means to trust God no matter what,
Mm,
and trust him even with the hardship. So when we have a disagreement now, we try to understand, okay, where did this come from? Why did we just get into a quick mess all of a sudden?
yeah. Where did that? Yeah.
Where did that come from? And how did we just go on opposite ends of the spectrum so
Yeah.
quickly? And now I think we both realize that we need to stay in it, we need to understand, and we are trusting each other because we're trusting God first.
Mm,
No matter what we go through, that he's the one who's going to take us through. And as we're trusting him, we're taking maybe the baby steps. They might
mhm.
be going backwards, like I said before, but we're still moving in a direction where we feel like we can honor God,
Yeah.
with our thoughts, with our words, with our relationship, with our family dynamics,
Mhm.
all of that, that we can honor God, or we can go away from what he actually has desired us to do.
Right. Right. So I don't know when you decided this, but I know you felt like you've been called to write a book about your story. And
Mhm.
so can you share why you feel like this is something that you should share and what all that entails?
Mhm. Right a little bit before we moved from Colorado to Greenville, I started just sensing that I should write, and I felt it in a quiet time, and I was journaling a ton, and I write all my feelings out on paper, and then ask God to cover those feelings with truth,
Mm,
because sometimes my feelings contradict what truth is.
that's a good practice.
And so in that journaling time, I just sensed that he was showing me that our story could potentially have an impact on somebody and give them hope in their circumstances,
Mm,
that they wouldn't feel stuck like we did,
yeah.
that they wouldn't feel like the loss of a spouse, even in brain injury, or a physical loss, that would be hopeless in the long
Mm,
run.
yeah.
So that started building, and I kept really submerging it. Nope, I'm not a writer, I'm not an author.
Mm,
But over time, I started really understanding that between what I had journaled and what we remembered from the injury, and then looking back and seeing all of the answers to prayer,
mm,
it was something where I was like, God, you are at work. You're doing a plan. You're working out your plan, just like you've worked out the plan from the beginning of when he created the world
mm,
till now, that you're doing something that we never ever expected.
mm.
And that's what I would love to give the readers, hope, in that we don't know why our suffering happens.
Mhm.
We can't pinpoint exactly the reason that we have suffered in certain ways. And all of us are immune. Like,
Right,
in this world, we'll have trouble, but take
mm,
heart. Jesus has overcome the world,
right.
right? So in that suffering, there's a verse. And let me see if I can find it, that talks about the suffering that we go through.
Mhm.
And we can rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. So my hope, we use that word interchangeably, but my hope is that somebody could walk away from even listening to this podcast, or walk away reading the book, knowing that they don't see the future, but they know that God sees the future.
Yeah.
And there's beauty in that. There's even beauty from ashes.
Yeah.
And even what you were talking about of really God, who was called Yahweh back then
Yeah.
with the Israelites, he consistently extended grace and love to them, but they turned away. And there's another verse that's close to my heart, that really ministered to me when I was in the deeper part of Darren's injury and really feeling the loss and fear behind that. And it's from Isaiah 43. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you.
Yeah.
When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. And when we felt like we were in that fire and we were being scorched and we felt empty and we felt lost, even though we had faith, we had all of those emotions. I want somebody to know that they can feel those emotions. They can cry out to God. They can lament their losses, but they can still move forward and have the hope that only God can give us, because this world is not our forever home. And really understanding that and being grateful for what we have here, but also knowing we're going to a greater hope that we can't even imagine what it's going to be like. And that's why I'm writing, for people to understand, to take what we have here, cling to God in the hardest, in the bitter trials that we can have, but walk away knowing that this is temporary, even though it feels permanent. This is temporary, and we have the hope of eternal life with the Lord.
Yeah. And that in 1999, I went through a real deep depression. And that was that was a very important passage. And in my Bible study this morning, it was also one from Isaiah where, he will uphold you with his righteous right hand. And that I just clung to those verses. And I've shared this on the podcast before, but the depression that I was in at that time, my kids were little. They were 7 and 4 at the time. And I was so depressed that I didn't see any way out, even though I was, praying and asking God to deliver me from this. I really felt like that I would end up in an institution and then my kids would be taken away from me. That's how severe it was. And so I found these verses and Psalms. Oh my gosh, reading through the Psalms. David, he went through that depression. He went through that horrible, like he was being chased. He was running for his life and wondering, why, God, are you allowing this? But look at the king that he became because of all of that suffering. And God, he refines us in these fires, and it's not fun.
No, it's not. And even David in the Psalms, like as he makes it real for us, he cried out so much. And then even in one Psalm, he can flip-flop from, God, my bones are wasting away. And then, but I remember your song in the night. I remember you, Lord. And then another one, how long will I wait, God? How long? And then, but God, you are my refuge and you are my strength. So it was like, that's a model that we can look at to say this world isn't going to be perfect for us, and to expect it can be very disheartening. And yet looking at David and other people in the Bible and seeing how they trusted, and he was on the run for a long time. And he trusted, and he kept trusting his God. He kept trusting his God and kept trusting his God. And that's why I feel like that builds that confident rest that we can have, knowing that God has the long haul plan in his mind already. He's planned it and we don't. And so to walk step by step in his footsteps even if we might have a hard day, knowing that we can still trust in a big God who's going to take care of us in the long run.
Yeah. So as we close up here, I usually like to ask my guests if they have like a piece of advice, a resource, or scripture. If somebody out there is really struggling, just life in general, things are hard. It may not be in their marriage with a physical ailment, it may be something else. But is there anything that you would want to share with our listeners?
The first thing I thought of is my dependence on God grew as we went through this hardship. And I had a personal choice. I could either turn from God or I can turn to his word. And at times I turned from God, but many times I turned to his word. And that grew my dependence on him, and it grew the faith, the little faith that I had to understand that he has a plan. It helped me navigate the waters of uncertainty, and it helped me to navigate the day-to-day miscommunication that Darren and I would have, and the surprises that may come up of tragedy or heartache, or just simply someone saying something that wasn't kind. It helped me understand that God is right there with me. He's redeemed me. He calls me by name, and he is certainly continuing to do that. The other verse that I've grown very fond of, and also want to leave with any listener, is from Romans 15, because it shows, as we believe, that's really having trust in God at all times, with whatever circumstances we're facing, and that in this that we can overflow in hope. So it says, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. And you mentioned before that joy that can only come from God. Your joy that exudes from you can only come from God. So no matter what we're going through, whatever circumstances we're facing, we can have that hope. And that is a sure and steadfast thing, no matter what crumbles underneath us.
Yeah, that's so good. Really true. So, Wendy, if the listeners want to connect with you, how can they find out more?
Yes, I have a website. It's wendyarickard.com. So it's WENDY, the letter A, and then last name is RICKARD.com. So would love to have anybody listening, if they want to sign up. I'll send a few 5 devotional freebies to you, and invite you to engage and be a part of the community that we have growing. And just could you pray? Pray whatever God does with this book. Nearing that finish line of the rough draft, but wondering and praying, God, is it to be published by a traditional publisher or self-published? And just walking through that process. Would love prayers for that.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And can they find you on social media?
Yes, it's Wendy A. Rickard on Instagram and on Facebook.
Okay, well, that makes it easy then. Well, I'm so glad I got to introduce you to my listeners. And I am, of our little group of 4 writers, all of you have been on my podcast now. So you completed the circle.
Great. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story, Wendy.
Thank you.